Welcome to the Beautiful Kingdom Builders Podcast, your place for redemptive conversations about gender, justice, abuse, and healing in the Christian faith. I'm your host, Reverend Ruth Perry. My guest today is author, journalist, and religious satirist Becky Garrison, whose most recent book is titled Gaslighting for God, a satirical guide to saving yourself from spiritual narcissists. Thank you so much for being here today, Becky.
Well, thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
I just finished your book yesterday, and I was really amazed by it. It was really powerful. It wasn't what I was expecting in some ways, and then it was so much more deep and insightful than I was expecting in other ways. And so I highly recommend Gaslighting for God to anyone who wants to learn more about gaslighting and narcissism and how this intersects with the Christian church in America. It's really fantastic. But as I was reading your book, one of the thoughts that I kept having was, have the producers or writers of the show Righteous Gemstones reached out to you, Becky? I think you'd be
No, they have not. And in fact, I mean, that show, my only quibble with that show is that in real life, prosperity gospels would never swear in public. We use words like sugar instead of other words. So that was my only quibble with the show. And I don't think they would have been quite as sexually But that's the Danny McBride thing. He likes to have men walking around doing things, and he did that. But other than that, he really captured, I think, the essence of someone, even Eli and even his wife. They were still so caught up in their own narcissism that even the sweet, precious matriarch, she was still narcissistic as all get out. It was more overt versus covert, but there was clearly an evidence that they never really cared about their congregation. They cared about the numbers in the pews. And that's what I think the ultimate definition of a narcissist versus someone who's self-absorbed. I mean, we all like attention, it's nice to be recognized. It's nice to get validated. And sometimes when you have a book coming out or another project and you can get full up your own butt, you can get a little too full of yourself, but then someone can call you out and say, hey, wait a minute. Knock it off. That could not happen with the Righteous Gemstones. They lacked empathy. They lacked compassion. They had no self-awareness whatsoever of how their actions were impacting others. There's also a grandiose sense of self. I am better than you. I am a better human being than you. I am smarter than you. If it's one of those mean girl things, I look better than you. Whatever it is, I am better than other people. Not just I'm for myself, but I'm full of myself a little bit on times.
I appreciated towards the end of your book, you did talk about how it is important for us to take some pride in our work and to enjoy the process of creating things and putting things out there and creating community. And because in the back of my mind, I always have this little niggling thing, like I don't want to be narcissistic. And sometimes, like now starting this podcast, I feel really passionate about putting alternative narratives about Christianity out there rather than the toxic forms that are so pervasive. But I don't want to be narcissistic. And so I really did appreciate that at the end of your book, how you talked about how taking some pride in your work and like enjoying that process is good.
Typically, if you're asking yourself, am I narcissistic? Odds are you're not. The kind of celebrity who humble brags, oh, we're all a little narcissistic, or oh, I just might be narcissistic about that. Yeah, that person's a flaming narcissist trying to deflect. But a lot of us, it is something that you struggle with. And I think it's a legitimate struggle. How do you have an open conversation and admitting your humanity? You might look at your podcast one week and go, damn, someone's doing better than me. That's normal. That's okay to do. It's acknowledging it's an inability. Not there's another human being on the other end, and that person matters. And they don't matter as someone who can give you volunteer hours, who can give you their money, who can give you whatever you need from them, the affirmation, the accolades, et cetera, But we all have that. And it's important. It's called either high self-esteem, healthy narcissism. That's what gets me to keep going up and keep going. I believe in what I'm doing. I believe in my work. I believe in it passionately, and I will defend it. And that might maybe come off as a bit of an a-hole. But that's a difference between that and a narcissist. Like if someone's being kind of rude to me and kind of a jerk, and I'm a little bit rude back, that might be justified in my behavior. I'm still going to feel a little something. I hurt someone's feelings. I feel bad. And I should feel a little bad because I hurt someone's feelings. And what am I going to do to make that better so I can become more regulated so I don't snap at someone?
How do you think that employing humor is particularly impactful when you're having difficult conversations like this?
Well, that's the role of the satirist. If you think of it, we function as the court jester. We keep the king honest. I'm thinking one of my childhood influences was Monty Python. I was a prenatal Episcopalian. My late father was an Episcopal priest and a sociology professor. Do the math, do the ecclesiology. Yep, I was prenatal Episcopalian. And so the way in which they lampoon the lunacies, you all can laugh at something collectively. And once you can laugh at something and say, oh my God, this is absolutely ridiculous, it helps break the energy down. And it really gives us a chance to see, because the point of a satirist is if we can break the idol, smash the idol, you can then see the glimpses of God or goodness underneath, but you first must smash the idol. And we're in a period right now of a lot of idol smashing. And that's where you're getting a lot of the pushback, is that from the most extreme fundamentalist to the most enlightened guru, everyone has their idol and they love it. I mean, the people would love it. The Wittenberg door, the progressives. I say this in the book. When I would satirize a televangelist, all of a sudden we would satirize Jim Wallace, Tony Campolo, Brian McLaren, the whole emergent church gang. And all of a sudden you would have thought that we committed Harry Carey on, it was like, and that's why I did not understand that versus someone like a Jerry Jenkins, who I mentioned in the book. We satirized him. How can you not satirize the Left Behind series? You have to do that. It is right. When we had the Plumber's Edition, the Cleft Behind, everything, and he wrote us back and said, hey, this is funny. I'm open for an interview if you're up for it. And I did it. And we do not agree on probably anything theologically, or very few things we would agree on. But we had one of the most pleasant conversations because he was a decent human being. He was not a narcissist. He was kind, he was generous, and we had a very pleasant interview. Other people that I've agreed with on almost everything theologically, and then all of a sudden I'll just critique them, and you would have thought that I did just something horrible to them. They just go absolutely like Tasmanian devil ballistic. And until the research into narcissism, I had no clue what was going on. And now I can watch the news. I can watch certain progressive pastors and their conservative counterparts and go, yep, that's a narcissistic meltdown. Okay, I don't have to take that person seriously, because you cannot have a dialogue with a narcissist. You can enjoy their entertainment if there's no abuse involved. I want to make that clear. If there's abuse, you should not be supporting this. But if the person is just a full-blown narcissist and you happen to like their music, you like their performance, go see it. It's enjoyable. Just don't expect anything beyond the evening's fun. And I think that's where, especially Christians, we're looking for a form of a community. You cannot have that with a narcissist. And that's what you have to give up, is the hope that you'll ever have a community with this person.
So you have developed a very finely tuned narcissism detector, it seems. And then you also say in your book that coupled with that, you have an intense desire to speak truth to pastoral power. So before we dive into the content of your book, I was curious if you would share what is your personal background and experiences that have shaped you in that way.
I was born to a hippie father from a very old, genteel Southern family. He was the black sheep, to put it kindly, I later discovered in my teens was an alcoholic. I've now since realized he was also a narcissist. And I realized that the majority of my extended family were narcissists. He married an enabling birth mother type. Both of them died from their addictions in the 1970s. And at that time, the research was not there for alcoholism. So there was a lot of blame, a lot of shame. These were the bad people, and the family was displacing them. And I was also the family white elephant spotter, so to speak, in that I would say, why is so-and-so drunk? Why is this happening? I'm seeing something. And I would continuously be told, you're making that up. That isn't true. No, you're not. So I now have, through the research, learned that often the oldest child is the one scapegoat, because they're the ones who can see the truth. My younger brother was the golden child. My younger sister was the golden beauty, and I was the loser dreamer. So I was scapegoat. So this dynamic came from my childhood. But yet my father, in his research, I mentioned this in the book, he was studying how to reach those on the fringes. He was researching why were some kids joining SDS and others joining JAPUZA. What was it that was attracting these kids to these radical movements, neither one of which we now have learning was really proven to be very healthy? But why were kids drawn to wanting to make a better difference, and that put them up to be easily manipulated by people that had more nefarious agendas? So that got it started. When I discovered the Wittenberg door, it was the perfect outlet for all the anger that I felt about the church. I mean, I did go to divinity school because there was a side of silly me thought I wanted to be like my father, until I realized, had I done that, I don't think I'd be here today. The church would have crushed me. I see a lot of my friends that have a similar spirit to me, and the institutional church just crushed them. They do so much better when they're outside the church doing their own thing instead of trying to function within what I would say is a highly narcissistic institution. That I'm convinced that the institutional church is dead. I think there's some individual churches doing some great work, but I think their institutional structure is just too necrotic. And through the Wittenberg door, we began to satirize that. And that led to a lot of things. I did a lot of the faith and politics stuff. I also started, when God's Politics blog became a bestseller, that's when I started critiquing the progressives. And all of a sudden, all the progressives that loved the door, they loved how we went after the conservatives. That's when they started to hammer us. They could not accept the fact that there could be narcissism in their midst in a more covert form. As one who grew up with the frozen chosen, as you call the Episcopalians, I would say, hell yes, it's rampant.
I had a friend on maybe a month ago to share a story of being a survivor of a marriage with a narcissist, and her husband is Benjamin L. Corey, a progressive Christian writer about peace and nonviolence. But then in his personal life, just super controlling and passive aggressive and very much a narcissistic sponge feeding off of my friend. And I'm just at a loss of how does someone like my friend get any justice? For right now, she's alienated from her children because of litigation after their separation. She can't even see her children. And so it's such a frustrating situation.
It is. And I don't have an easy answer. I'm not a lawyer. I can't give legal advice. I did notice that what was interesting, I'm thinking about Philip Yancey, was another case that came into play. And that was very frustrating in that revelations came out that he had an affair. There was something involving his assistant that sounded a little nefarious. I mean, she died kind of suddenly in a freak climbing accident in a gym, which if you're an experienced climber almost never happens. So there's something a little fishy there. I'm just saying, I think in that case, he never accepted responsibility. He just said, he viewed the women in his life as pawns. And I think the best we can do is you just speak your truth to power. And I've been in that situation that she's been in. When I saw abuse within the U.S. emergent church movement in 2006, I spoke out and I got cambered. I got doxxed. I got cyberbullied. It was a very unpleasant situation. And the more I taught myself what gaslighting was and what scapegoating was, I understood the dynamics of what was happening. I learned how to do gray rock. Because in the beginning, I appeared crazy. I would be like, what do you mean? I am not jealous. I am simply pointing out the fact that you claim that you're inclusive and you have one female speaker. And then once the female speaker got on board, she immediately became just like the men because she had to preserve her place of power. So I was simply saying, you're promoting religionless Christianity and there's a hierarchy. There's a lot of abuse within this system. There's these private networks that are spreading all kind of stuff. And because I had not done enough work on myself and my own trauma triggers, I came off as crazy. I'm not going to recreate how I came off, but it was not to my best interest. So the first thing I say to anybody is get your own self together by finding whatever somatic therapy works for you. For me, it was EMDR. If I had not had EMDR, don't think I could have written the book because I would have been too triggered by bringing up past traumas. And I think that's the first thing I would say is, have you done your oxygen mask, taking care of yourself? And the second is what did not exist in 2006 that exists now are support groups. And Tony Jones tried to reemerge as another emergent church speaker. Other people all of a sudden started calling his crap out. That did not happen in 2006. Everybody was still part of, I want to be part of the cool kids crap. Your friend now has other women who have been through something similar. Tia Levings has an excellent list of trauma resources on her page. Her book, I Belong to Me, is coming out in May. I would give it to her as a gift. What do you need to do for yourself? And once you get to that point, I think you'll be in a better place. Your kids are going to see a different mother. They may be so poisoned and that you can't control, but you can control your response to a situation and find other people to support. When I had an experience, my first revelation of the narcissism, I got into a professional and personal relationship with a mindfulness therapist, who I'd later discovered is a narcissist, a malignant narcissist at best, may even have some psychopathic tendencies. I couldn't tell if he enjoyed inflicting his pain or if he just didn't care. But I joined a narcissistic support group and I realized this is 2016, so the research was much newer than it is now. And I realized I'm not alone. Other women have the same experience. This is a pattern. I could not see the pattern because I believed in the promise of whatever this person was preaching. I believed in the goodness. I had a good heart. I'm an empath, and my God, we're magnets for narcissists. I'm now narcissistic resistant. Narcissists don't approach me like they used to. You know, you can become narcissistic resistant. They will go to somebody else. And you have to also get over your fear of missing out. And I'm also over my hypervigilance. If I see a narcissist, someone that I know has extreme narcissistic tendencies, hurting someone else, I'll just point it out, but I'm not going to try to rescue people. But we've made so much progress. We're in the narcissistic research right now where alcoholism was in 1980. I started the recovery movement actually in 83, and it was very nascent. There wasn't a whole lot out there, but we were starting to understand that alcoholism was not a mental illness. It was a very complex dynamic that impacted the entire family. And how was I impacted? Being raised in an extended family of alcoholics who I now realize are many of them were narcissists, including the ones that aren't alcoholics. I mean, it was pretty much, I can count on one hand the number of extended family members I know that are not narcissists, to be honest. Began to realize a lot of that. And I think for people, find other people, they exist, and you'll develop a network and you discover you're not alone. And once you realize you're not alone, that eliminates so much of the anxiety and pain that you're feeling. At least that's been my experience.
It does seem like narcissism is such a systemic and widespread issue in our culture today. And just listening to you speak, I'm a pastor's kid as well, although my parents were teetotalers because they both came from alcoholic families. But that same dynamic was still in the family. And also a dynamic that was in my family that you name in your book is manipulators and martyrs. Often. You were quoting Brad Sargent's friend Linda O. Manipulators and martyrs go together in matched pairs. And I was thinking about how women are conditioned in the church to make ourselves smaller and to be quiet and meek and gentle. And so we're just trained from a very early age to be the martyr. And then we end up in, a lot of us end up in relationships like this where there's a manipulator. And part of that is the culture training men too, to be this way where they feel entitled to things and they feel special.
And then there's people like me that just push back from the get-go, and we're always excluded. And it's taken me a long time to develop sympathy for what I call the mean girls. I've been thinking about this, and I began to realize that my sister was a classic mean girl. And what it was is she, from the beginning, was raped based on her beauty. She was raped based on her looks, her ability to present. She never did the beauty pageant cheerleader thing. But that is one of the dynamics, is that we want our women to look a certain way. We want them to appeal to the male gaze. And if you don't, in the 70s and 80s, you'd be called lesbian, you'd be called worse, which was really absolutely horrible for women that actually were in same-sex relationships. To me, to use that term as a slur is just absolutely god-awful. And I kept telling them, no, I'm not a lesbian. I just don't want a guy that's going to be like the husband you guys married kind of thing, you know. And you tell people that sometimes you make a conscious decision that, given my family dynamics, I decided it was best that I remained unmarried and without children. I just decided that is the best. I cannot give a kid a decent family life. And I also need to do a lot of work on myself so I can now find a lot healthier relationships. So I made a conscious decision not to involve innocent humans in my family's dynamic, which was not an easy decision to make, but it was one that I realized I needed to do because it was not be fair to an innocent third party. I think, with the mean girls, I just realized they got ahead by using their sexuality. They're the ones that Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, other women preyed on. They wouldn't have preyed on me because they could tell by looking at me, I wasn't going to be that compliant. My attraction to narcissism was more the spiritual guru promising this. That's where I would be attracted to people. But in terms of just the whole mean girl persona, I resented those women like crazy for quite a while because they could make your life miserable. If you were the little nerdy writer, those kind of women can just make life hell. And even today, I encounter them sometimes. I'll do spirits reporting and beer reporting. I'm often the only woman there, so it's no big deal. But if I do wine reporting, some of those women can just be absolutely mean girl central. And some of the publicists. And I used to be worried about that. I used to get really like, I don't fit into these women. Now I realize we're all going through something. Even these women, these beauty queen pageants. You know, you see these 24-year-olds that are dating 60, 70, 80-year-olds. It's not healthy, but they're going through something on their own. There's got to be something going on because a lot of the mean girls are not happy. Because if you are really pleased and content with yourself, you don't need to be a raging bitch to other people. You don't need to do that. What is it about you that makes them feel like in order for them to affirm you, they have to put you down? And over time, I think these women develop a narcissistic core. I don't know if my sister, she didn't start out that way, but over time, she became more and more self-centered because her looks, that was her currency.
When I started reading, I thought that you talk a lot more about Trump. I was surprised that you didn't, and the way that evangelical and conservative Christians have embraced him, even though he appears to many people to be a Machiavellian, like the worst kind of just really dark triad personality type narcissist. What connections do you see between spiritual gaslighting and broader cultural patterns in politics and patriarchy and nationalism and all of those intersections?
I had an agent try to sell this book in 2018. The original book proposal was Trump focused. Publishers didn't want it. They said, we're done with Trump books. We have enough books. Hassan did the case against Trump. There is the book, The Dangerous Case. Banny Lee edited a book on the dangerous case of Donald Trump, lays it out. She ended up getting fired, by the way, for diagnosing someone, which was very questionable, but still, you're not supposed to diagnose. I believe that Trump is a symptom. Growing up as a kid, do you remember Lyndon LaRouche? Do you remember these? We've always had crackpots. We've always had nutcases. The question for me was why in 2016, when they were presented with a slate of reasonable Republican candidates, the voters chose Trump. That is the question that I wanted to answer. To me, that's a deeper question that was, brewing for some time. Now when you look through historically, we've had these church splits that have been simmering and simmering. Trump is just when it erupted. You look at 1979, that's the year the Episcopal Church first ordained women. It's also the formation of the moral majority. It was not founded on abortion because abortion came out in 1973. Evangelicals did not give a hoot. Jerry Falwell was quoted, that's a Catholic issue. But they were really upset about was interracial dating. And that's why they really formed. But they pretty soon we had to do a family-friendly thing because even in 79, you couldn't say we're the white party. You just could not say that and get elected in 79. So we had the moral majority. And then you look at the year I started writing for the Wittenberg Door, 1994 was the year the Republicans took over Congress with a Christian coalition. And we thought, oh, wow, that's going to be. And then you found Clinton in 96. In addition to the Monica Lewinsky scandal, he also formed the DLC, which really started to alienate a lot of progressives. You can see a lot of these shifts starting to happen in a lot of years. We thought in 2008, when Obama was elected, he was the first president to acknowledge atheists at the National Prayer Breakfast. We thought we're hitting this progressive revolution. And in 2016, I was really excited. The DNC put up the most diverse list of candidates ever. We had people of color. We had a gay man, more women, this dynamic lineup. The DNC stacked the deck and gave us Hillary. And that was the moment I said, we're going to get President Trump. And my friends who are progressive said, you're wrong. I said, no. The will of the people were ignored. You have enough Bernie bros that want change. They're going to vote for change. They did. And that's how we got Trump. And then in 2020, the Democrats, again, had a pretty good lineup, not quite as diverse. They gave us Biden, who we did not want. I felt that the progressives kept stacking the deck and further frustrating. And when people get frustrated and they feel like no one's listening to them, that's when they're susceptible to cult dynamics. That's when they're susceptible to saying somebody, they're not listening to you. Because guess what? They weren't. And if people feel that no one is listening to them, they will go to someone who is telling them exactly what they need to hear. That is the moment when people are the most susceptible to joining cults. I think that's what happened in 2020. And then in 2024, well, we're going to give you Biden again, even though you don't really want him. And then at the last minute, we're going to switcheroo and give you Kamala, who never won a primary. She was never the most popular candidate. And then, boom, Trump gets elected again. I'm looking at this from a broader perspective. I also think that people did not realize in 2024 how bad it was going to get. I think they thought they were taking a malignant narcissist who didn't care about anybody, but he was going to keep America out of war. He was going to keep America first. He was going to do something with sensible immigration. I don't know, sensible is not the word I'd use, but I think people thought it was going to be a continuation of the first term. I don't think they thought that you could get worse than Sarah Huckabee Sanders. I don't think they thought you could get worse than Jeff Sessions and Richard Barr. I don't think they could get worse than whoever was his defense secretary. The moment Pete Hegseth, and they changed the Department of War, This is when I felt it went from malignant narcissism to Machiavellianism. Because in the beginning, I do think there's a sense that, and anybody who lives in New York City knows this, he does not care about anybody but himself. He's mobbed up. The media wanted this conflict circus. I think if we had investigated his ties to Roy Cohn, for example, really thoroughly, this was scary. Roy Cohn was Joseph McCarthy's lawyer. That was Trump's lawyer. Roy Cohn repped several mob families. He introduced them to these mob families. And the media didn't investigate that because I think they wanted the Hillary-Trump matchup. That was great for ratings. Putting Biden against Trump, that was hysterical. I mean, that was like watching a really bad Saturday Night Live sketch to watch those two men debate. I was watching this going, no matter who gets elected, either going to be screwed or absolutely completely effed. In 2024, when they did the switcheroo, I said, this is not, we're going to get Trump again. And I just knew it. I didn't know how bad it was going to be. What people might want to realize is that there's a difference between a malignant narcissist and full-blown cult. And the distinction is a cult leader by nature is an extreme narcissist. They're also a psychopath, meaning they enjoy what they're doing. A narcissist doesn't care, a psychopath enjoys. That's how I distinguish it. And the Machiavellian nature is they want to take over the world. They want domination over their entire universe. And whereas a narcissist just wants to be number one, they don't feel the need to dominate. They need to be the center of attention, but there's not this need for the world domination that you see now. And we've got ourselves into this pickle, and I don't see the Democrats, the progressives, offering candidates that are really going to get us out of it, at least on the presidential level. On the local level, yes, that's why I'm shifting my focus somewhat. I think we can help rebuild at the local level. How do we care for our neighbor? There's a difference between Trump and MAGA, and I just make that distinction. Where we go from here, I'm not going to be a politician. I'm not going to be a fortune teller. But that's why I didn't make it Trump specific, because this is going to continue when he's gone. MAGA is going to be here. And they're also ardent progressive. And I think it would help to look at what were legitimate concerns that people had that the progressives ignored. And that's the beginning of a step of healing, is to look at that component. Like how many women who were Maha, they just wanted alternative treatments for their kids. A lot of them, they were not full-blown MAGA, but all of a sudden they felt that Big Pharma was telling them how to rule their lives. Big Pharma was calling them idiots, or education was calling them idiots for wanting to homeschool their kids. They wanted to do alternative things that were legal and justified, and they were not allowed to do it. You know, women were trying to give their little kid who has epilepsy, giving him CBD and discovering it worked, and then being told they couldn't give it. They had to give the kid a pharma drug that A, they couldn't afford, and B, cause their kid to be sick. What would have happened if the women who were interested in natural health had been taken more seriously? Would they have gone full blown? You know, so you always have to think of what could you have done. Were you so full of your own hubris and your own self-righteousness that you didn't listen to what other people were asking and demanding? And I think that's where I'm seeing the progressive movement is are they willing to listen to alternative views? And also for some of the Republicans that say they're left for Republicans, there's a large group of people that I think are dissatisfied with everything. And what are they going to do about that dissatisfaction? Where can they put that?
So what is it about narcissistic personalities that both woo and wound people?
I would call it the Jekyll Hyde syndrome. They can be incredibly charismatic. They're also very tuned into when you're vulnerable. You see this with certain rather nefarious dating coaches, is I will give you what you're looking for. You're looking for women empowerment. You're looking to explore your female sexuality. You're looking to do better your business. You're looking to be a better mother. Whatever you are looking for that you're not finding, they have the answer. And they will just love bomb you to bits. They will give you everything you want. And to the point where you don't realize how much money you're spending, how much time you're spending, because you're getting that fix. You're getting that high. You're getting that adrenaline rush, that oxytocin. You're getting that dopamine hit. It feels so good to finally be recognized, especially if you come from a background where you haven't been recognized, you know, and then the nanosecond you disagree, the moment you say, I can't afford to pay it this month, I need to take some time for myself, I need to step back a little bit, whatever, you have just drained them of their narcissistic supply. The moment you cut it off, they will turn into Mr. Hyde and do what is called narcissistic collapse. They will go completely irrational. I think for a lot of us, we do get disappointed. If someone cancels on you last minute, you're going to be disappointed. But that's different than someone going completely ballistic. It's someone saying, I'm disappointed that we're not making this projections right. What can we do to make this better? Versus I'm disappointed in you for failing. after you have a narcissistic collapse hit you, you sit there going, what the hell just happened? It's not a simple, like, I need to have a talk with you about your work performance, or we need to discuss you being a bit cleaner or a bit whatever. It's complete annihilation of you. Or all of a sudden they get what they want out of you. You wrote those 3 articles I needed you to write to make me feel good. Okay, bye. I'm gone. They took what they needed from you and then they left you. Just bye. And you're sitting there going, what the hell just happened here? And their words don't match their actions. And after a while, you start to find yourself going crazy, which is why I find it very helpful to identify the pattern, because it keeps you from going crazy. Now I can identify it and I go, okay, that person's having narcissistic collapse. I'm going to treat him like I treat a 3-year-old, a toddler. Just walk away. I'm not going to engage. You cannot rationalize with a toddler. You cannot be reasonable. And if you give him his binky or his Nobel Peace Prize, it's not going to solve anything. It's like a pacifier situation. They're going to continue to escalate. This is not going to stop until you walk away and then let them find somebody else. And over time, it starts to crumble. And that's what you're seeing now, is the starting of the crumbling. Maybe I'm too naive to think that, but I do believe, and I'm looking at the Epstein files, to me, is the beginning of a revelation. We're finally starting to see a lot of stuff start to crumble. And that's a good thing. I say hallelujah.
What is the connection to pedophilia and sex abuse in these kind of high control groups?
Because they can. I do not understand the attraction to pre-adolescent children. I do not understand why any man would want to have a relationship with someone who's not age appropriate. I don't get it. And I think that's some of it, is these men do not want adult relationships. They want relationships they can control. Men have always wanted significant younger women, and there's always women who are willing or naive enough. In the case of children, you start to tell a kid who comes from a very broken home, who's never had any kind of love, they're so susceptible to being love bombed. And all of a sudden, they've never had anything. And wow, I got a couple $100 just for doing this little act. Can't be that bad. And then before they know it, they've been trafficked beyond their beliefs because they didn't understand what was going on. They didn't understand the dynamics. So an older woman would walk into that and go, what the hell? But then I'm looking into something that you might have heard. There was a UMC minister in Missouri, and she was the executive assistant and then the grounds manager for Epstein Island. And she claims she didn't see anything. At the time, she was studying to be a minister, as I understand it. And the UMC has suspended her pending investigation because they feel that her involvement in this case went against the UMC's code of ethics around treatment of women. Hallelujah for small victories. However, I'm very shocked that she claims she saw nothing. I mean, you see the photos of the house. You didn't think it was odd there was a dentist chair in there. You didn't think it was odd there were photos of underage girls. There was like Lolita on steroids. You're a pastor. Now, I don't expect a pastor to be a complete intuitive, because we all have different personality types. But if you're a pastor and you don't think there's something wrong with unaccompanied minors getting off of a plane to meet a group of old men, if your spidey sense doesn't do anything and you claim you saw nothing, then you're not qualified to be a minister. Because at a basic core, a minister needs to notice when something that serious is going on. I would expect a pastor to know that youth minister is getting a little too handsy. Yes, that volunteer is being inappropriate. If you can't even see something as blatantly obvious as underage girls, unaccompanied often, with a lot of older men, and you think this is just a pool party, you're not qualified for ordained ministry. And the fact that she got called out on it, I'm glad the UMC is doing the right thing. What no one has figured out is, how did she meet him? I want to know, how did a UMC minister from Missouri meet Jeffrey Epstein and get offered that job? So I'm always interested in looking at the connections, because Epstein has made some referrals.
Yeah.
He referred Eric Metaxas's book to somebody. Oh, no, I take it back. Ken Starr referred Eric Metaxas's book to him. And then there was an instance where he forwarded on Rick Warren's newsletter. Well, okay, what is Ken Starr doing referring the book written by the guy who was one of the most earliest Trump supporters? Eric Metaxas was supporting Trump before anybody else did, just about. So he was a key figure in helping Trump get elected. Why is Ken Barr recommending this Bonhoeffer book? The book is terrible. Every scholar said it's terrible. And then you have other references like that. Epstein recommended Dobson's Dare to Discipline book to a young survivor who was having problems with her family. These are very evangelical books. How are they getting into that network? And so far, that's the only Christian connection I've been able to find. Deepak Chopra is another thing. He claims I didn't do anything inappropriate. And you're sitting here discussing how, God is a construct, cute girls are real. And I would never go to a guru that said that. That is disgusting. I mean, that is just the way he's discussing about girls. It's like, did you bring me girls? Did you bring me girls? You're a grown adult male who is responsible, thanks to Oprah in large part, for bringing in all of these concepts of the East to the West. Oprah, basically, now we're starting to realize, was a walking show for predators. So she gave us Dr. Phil. She gave us Dr. Oz. She gave us the anti-vax movement. She supported John of God. And if you Google John of God in Brazil, he is in jail for bizarre medical experiments and pedophilia. So I think we have to look at ourselves and why did we ever trust Oprah? She's not trustworthy. Look at all the people she's introduced us to. She never took any responsibility. She also introduced us to The Secret. Dr. Lisa Rankin is someone that I would recommend your listeners check out. She's one of the people that spoke on Deepak's stage and one of the few people speaking out. All these people that stood and profited by being connected to Deepak have not spoken out. And yet she did. A few people are speaking out. There's some outliers who are saying, I'm willing to risk my book contract. I'm willing to risk my place on the center stage. I'm willing to do what needs to be done to make this right. Now, why they didn't speak out before is another story, but they're speaking out now. And I think this is similar to the Weinstein and the Cosby case. It takes a while to convince people that someone this powerful is this evil.
I had a funny interaction. I met Eric Metaxas 7 or 8 years ago. I was homeschooling my children by day and waitressing by night, and I live in the vicinity of Liberty University, and he had a group of conservative influencers at dinner at the steakhouse, and they were there for some event at the Falkirk Center at Liberty. And after the dinner, Eric Metaxas was standing up, and he asked me if I knew who he was. And I said, I do know who you are. And he said, oh, that's so nice. I'm going to let my wife know that you said that. What did I say?
I interviewed him for The Door, and this is before the Wilberforce book. He was post-Veggie Tales, not quite the best-selling author. And it was one of the most worst interviews of my life. It's just, all the oxygen in the room was sucked out. And he was incredibly full of himself. But what I appreciate about that was that I could get it. I knew to stay away from him from the get-go. It was the progressives. Like, I was drawn in to Nadia Bolz-Weber, Pete Rollins, that more progressive line of thought. And actually, I endorsed some of their stuff in the beginning, because in the beginning, it sounded really good. So then all of a sudden, the moment they became best-selling authors, or if not best-selling in the case of Rollins, the moment they got their little click going, it was just all of a sudden, ooh, well, I mean, they were just as obnoxious as Eric Metaxas, but in a slightly subtler way. And it can be really hard when someone writes something that you believe, and then you meet them and you go, oh, crap. And so I'm telling people, take what's good. Okay, if they wrote something that you enjoy, acknowledge that. There's nothing wrong with you for taking someone's words and saying, oh, that word's really moved me. But just know that person didn't live out those teachings, and try to find people that did live out those teachings. They exist. I mean, Henry Nouwen, there was never anything about him. And he's someone that I continue to rely on. Yes, there were some abuses within the community he formed, but I was after his death. He had nothing to do with that. There are a lot of good spiritual thinkers that don't engage in this. So the question is, don't kick yourself, but then look and say, where can I find better fruit? Where can I find fruit from people, who aren't, like that, which is why I continue to recommend Tia Levings. There's a lot of people in the religious trauma field that I tell people, be careful. Similar to the recovery movement, there's people out there wanting to make a name for themselves as deconstruction coaches, religious trauma coaches, whatever you want to help someone with their faith. And that's why I say I'm a writer. I mean, I have an MSW, actually clinical social work, if you want to be particular, but I'm not licensed right now. And I am going to sell myself as a writer. I am not going to sell myself as a life coach. I'm going to stay in my own lane. I'm going to leave that up to qualified trauma therapists who are working currently in that field. And I will provide the education to hopefully give people the awareness that, yeah, maybe that kind of help would be helpful for me. But there are a lot of people out there trying to sell you their own shtick, and there's some really good, solid voices. And it's important to kind of distinguish between the two of them. And it takes a while. I mean, to me, one of the biggest things is, do you get a sense of community around them? Do you get a sense of care? Or is it all about them and their accomplishments and what they can do and what their success rate is? And we're kind of in this gray kind of new frontier. The research in the narcissism is only about 10 years old. you still have a lot of therapists that think religious trauma is BS, that they don't think that you get trauma from a religious experience. So there's a lot of education that needs to happen, similar to where I said where alcoholism was in the 1980s.
I also had EMDR therapy because I realized that I've been reading about religious trauma for a long time, and it didn't ever occur to me that I had religious trauma. But then it kind of clicked in place after many years of like myself just trying to make sense of all the different things I'd experienced in the church and often very painful and harmful things. And having that EMDR therapy was extremely helpful.
Well, yeah, and it's not the only form of therapy that could work. There are other somatic forms. There's, brain spotting, emotional isometrics, a lot of different treatments. And, you find a therapist that works for you. And how I chose my therapist for EMDR is I began to ask and see did she really listen to me? Like I described to her, that I didn't want to get married. I didn't want to have kids. And I was describing, my relationship status and whatnot. And I looked to see in her eyes, was she judging me? Is she saying that whatever choices, if I made healthy, legal lifestyle choices, those should be mine. Like if you want to legally choose to be if you want to become a sex worker, that's your personal decision versus being coerced into something. So I'd say when you go to a therapist, how does that therapist treat you? When you get any kind of a creepy vibe, get the hell out of there. Find another therapist. There's plenty of therapists that do EMDR, that do somatic work. And a lot of that is for women. Your gut is such a good tool and we don't use it. We kind of just say, oh, I'm not feeling good. I'll just go take some Pepto-Bismol. We don't tune into why are you feeling that? No, don't medicate that. Don't drink it away. You don't need a glass of wine to deal with this. Think of why you're feeling this way. And that tells you something isn't quite right. Now, this therapist might be right for somebody else, but it's not right for you. Not everything is narcissistic, but something just might not be right for you. The more you're in tune with what you need and what you want, you're not going to be coerced into just doing and going along with what everybody else says. And you also don't care what the mean girls say, which for women, I think that's something that we really need to focus on because a lot of the mean girls got ahead and those of us who weren't mean girls didn't get the job. But what I'm starting to realize now is they paid a price for getting that job. They have had to sacrifice their looks. I mean, we can make fun of Margot Lagerface all we want, but those women had to subject whoever they are to so deep inside of them that it's almost like there's not a person there anymore. I don't know if they were born that way. I don't know a lot of their childhoods, but they've become an incredibly self-centered, narcissistic person that can only think of themselves from their own lens of beauty. And they're doing whatever they can do to maintain their place of power. That is clearly a narcissistic move. I don't know how many of them started out that way. Suspect is like my sister that we're told from a very young age they're beautiful. We're never told they were smart. We're never told they could do whatever they wanted to do. So they began to focus primarily on developing their looks. And as they got to be in their 30s and 40s, it got even harsher. They had to continue to maintain that persona.
Well, your book is a very helpful guide. The social commentary that you give and your insight and how well you understand what is going on and how well you describe what all these terms mean: narcissism, gaslighting, conditioning, the echo chamber. There's so many different things that you describe and explain. And it seems like you've read 100 books in the process of writing this book.
It helps to read all the research that's out there. And in fact, a lot of the narcissism books, what I didn't like about it is they were focusing on dating or parenting, which I think is an important thing. And it was also having a black and white view. And I take a gray view, which is why I said, if something's risen to the level of malignancy, like what I was finding in the U.S. emergent church world, then I feel it's wrong to participate in that group's activities because you're supporting an abusive culture. But if someone is just a full-blown self-centered narcissist, but yet you enjoy their comedy show. I mean, we don't evaluate musicians or actresses, or we say we like the show. And I found that by looking at something like, okay, I like your show, it really changes how I feel because I'm not looking to form a community. I'm looking to have an enjoyable evening, enjoying the social lubricant, because we all need some degree of social lubricant. We have a loneliness epidemic. But I've also learned it's okay to be alone. It's better to be alone than to be trying to get the approval of a narcissistic system, a narcissistic community. And I was one of these Uber volunteers. I'd love to help. And for me, just pulling back and saying, nope, not going to do it. That's been life-changing for me, truly. And you can find communities that care. I mean, I go to tasting rooms like Masara, this winery run by a Persian winemaker, and have an incredibly connected experience. At Kristoff Farms, Nick Kristoff and his wife, they do cider and community building conversations through cider and their Pinot Noir wines. There are ways, even though you can say, oh, this one aspect of the industry is very narcissistic and superficial and only cares about wine scores and who's this and who's that. There's another side that's really connective and really community and grounded in sustainability. I tell people in my reporting, I look to do stuff that's reporting on sustainability, community, spirituality. And I consciously look for things that have those elements. If they don't have it, I might say, oh, this is a nice evening, nice dinner, nice glass of wine, nice music, nice show. But I'm not going to expect that to be my community connective place. I'm going to go to those community connective places that really care about me. And it's life-changing once you can learn to make that shift. And I wish the best for everybody, but take care of yourself, for your friend, and find other people. There are other people like you. This is emerging. As more and more of us start to come to these awarenesses, we're finding other support groups, tons of podcasts. I've been on a number of them. And, there's a lot of conversations happening, how to find authenticity. I think people are searching for that in this world. And I don't think you can find it at the national level, but I think you can find it at the grassroots level.
Thank you so much for all the work you've done to be a guide to others into this more hopeful and healthy way to live. Where is the best place for people to find you online and find your work?
It's available at any online, most online retailers. My Substack is, you Google Becky Garrison or Gaslighting for God. That's my Substack. That's where I post a number of pieces. I also have a Facebook author page, Becky Garrison Writer. And then an Instagram is Becky_Garrison. I'm also on LinkedIn as Becky Garrison, and there's a YouTube channel. But I don't use the latter two that frequently. I'm also moving more and more towards Substack because I find out I can have more substantial conversations there. The noise in Meta universe is just not helpful, and I'm not going to pay to play with Mark Zuckerberg. He does not deserve my money.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, Becky. Would you like to have the last word before we sign off?
Well, just thank you for the work that you're doing as well. I have not lost my optimism that first drew me to narcissistic energies. I just am now being far more discerning. So I would say to them, be an optimist, but also be a discerning optimist, not a naive.
All right. Thank you so much. God bless,
You too.
Becky.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Beautiful Kingdom Builders podcast. If today's episode encouraged you or sparked something new, please share it with a friend and take a moment to subscribe or leave a review. It truly helps. You can keep the conversation going on thebeautifulkingdombuilders.com or find us on your favorite social media platform. I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions. I'm Reverend Ruth Perry. Thanks for joining me, and may grace and peace go with you this week.